Alright, welcome to another lesson about the War of 1812, my friends. In our last lesson, we talked a little bit about what America was like after the Revolutionary War, when it first became the United States. Remember, after the Revolutionary War, the United States was growing in both size and wealth. Our third president, Thomas Jefferson, made what was called the Louisiana Purchase, which more than doubled the size of the United States. We were also growing in wealth, and a lot of that was due to our trade with other countries. As part of our trade practice back then, we used ports, or places where ships could dock. These ports allowed ships from other countries to come in and trade their goods. One of the causes of the War of 1812, we're going to keep track of all of them on this graphic organizer. We talked about 3 already, and we'll talk about some more today. But first, let's review those 3 that we talked about. One of them has something to do with the ports that the U.S. used for trade. The French and British both did something to those ports that made the U.S. angry. They created a wall of ships that blocked the ports and kept U.S. ships from leaving and ships from other countries from entering and docking. There is a special word for that. It was blockade. They formed a blockade around U.S. ports. The second thing that happened that led up to the War of 1812 was something that the British Navy did in order to get more soldiers. Do you remember what that was? How was the British Navy adding more soldiers? They were kidnapping or stealing soldiers from both France and America. We called this impressment. Impressment was when the British forced other soldiers to join their navy. And our third thing that we talked about in our last lesson also had to do with ships. The British often seized U.S. ships. So when you seize something, you take it by force. They seized U.S. ships and they stole cargo from those ships, or what the ships were carrying. Alright, after our read aloud today, we'll add more to our chart about what led up to the War of 1812. Before we talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about what America was like after the Revolutionary War. After the Revolutionary War, our very first president, George Washington, worked very hard to form a good relationship with Great Britain, with the King of Great Britain. They made an agreement to leave each other's ships alone and to not attack each other anymore. An agreement like this between 2 countries is called a treaty. So the United States of America had signed a treaty with Great Britain to get along and to not fight. But remember, Great Britain during 1812, during the time leading up to the War of 1812, Great Britain was fighting with France, who the United States also had a really good relationship with. So both countries are now fighting with each other, and the United States has a good relationship with both of them, so they have a tough choice to make on whether or not to get involved, and on which side to stand on. We'll learn about that in our read aloud as soon as we finish our vocabulary words. Treaty. A treaty is a formal agreement between countries. The 2 countries signed a peace treaty at the end of the war. Committee. A committee is a group of people who come together to complete a task or make decisions. Many schools have parent-teacher committees who work together to make the school a better place. Abandon. Abandon means to stop doing something or to give up entirely. We had to abandon the idea that we would have ice cream cones after dinner when we realized that we were all out of ice cream. Suspicious. Suspicious means having doubts or feeling that something is wrong. When our car began making strange noises, my mother became suspicious. Patience. Patience means having the ability to wait for something without getting angry or upset. At lunchtime, we need to have patience when we wait in line for food. I'm going to read a couple of different sentences. If the sentence I read is an example of someone showing patience, I want you to say yes. If the sentence I read is not an example of someone showing patience, say no. The students were counting the days until winter break, but still working hard in school. That one's showing patience. If they're still able to work hard and not get upset, they are being patient. Stefan finished a puzzle for his little brother because he felt his brother was taking too long to get the last piece in place. Stefan's not being very patient in that one. Baxter waited for his grandfather to walk across the street, even though it was taking him a long time. Yes, Baxter was showing patience with his grandfather. Jeffrey bought a book to read while he waited at the dentist for his appointment. He's showing patience. He's not getting upset at having to wait, but finding something to keep him busy, keep himself busy. And our last one. Jennifer kept asking her mother how much longer it would take at the grocery store. If Jennifer keeps asking again and again and again, she's not being very patient. After the Revolutionary War, each of the first 3 presidents of the United States wanted the United States and Great Britain to be friends again. Remember, we have George Washington, our first president, then our second president, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson, our third president. Even before the Napoleonic Wars began, George Washington had tried to establish a peaceful relationship with the British. Under his leadership, the United States and Great Britain signed a treaty called the Jay's Treaty. In this treaty, the British promised not to get involved or interfere with the United States business or activities. Do you think the British kept their promise? During this time, one of the most common ways for 2 countries to maintain a good relationship was to trade with each other. The United States sent flour and tobacco and other goods to Great Britain. Great Britain sent tea and manufactured goods to America. When the Napoleonic Wars began in Europe, France and Great Britain became enemies. The United States was caught in the middle. The US government really did not want to have to get involved. So the United States was friends with Great Britain and with France, but now the two were fighting. Merchants in New England relied on trade with Britain to run their businesses. France had helped America during the Revolutionary War. The United States wanted to keep that friendship too. However, when US ships, cargo, and sailors were being threatened, especially by the British, the United States could not ignore it. What do you think the United States will do? In 1807, while Thomas Jefferson was president, something happened at sea that made many Americans very angry with the British. As they often did, a British ship stopped a US ship at sea. The American ship was the USS Chesapeake. When the British commander demanded that the Chesapeake be searched, the American captain refused. The British commander did not like that. He ordered his men to open fire. Several American soldiers died in the attack. After that, many members of Congress began to call for war with Britain. Members of Congress are the people elected to represent the states. Those members of Congress who wanted the United States to go to war were known as war hawks. As time went on, President Jefferson was losing patience with the British. He tried and tried to stop their aggression. In response to the attack on the USS Chesapeake, the government passed the Embargo Act of 1807. An embargo is a government order that limits trade. The Embargo Act stated that U.S. ports would be closed to foreign ships, especially British ships. An act is a law that is made by the government. This meant that there would be no more trade with Britain. The U.S. government hoped that Britain would lose so much money that they would be forced to change their ways. However, the Embargo Act caused more problems for American farmers and merchants in New England and New York than it did for the British. You might think that what was happening at sea was enough to drive the United States to war with Great Britain. But there were even more problems on American land. Even though Britain had lost the 13 colonies to America, it still had control of land in the northern Great Lakes region and the Northwestern Territories. Britain also controlled part of what is now Canada. The British had forts and outposts along the US and Canadian border. An outpost is a military camp that is located in another country. Most Americans during this time were farmers. Many settlers were moving west in search of land to farm. Although the wagons were on American land, the U.S. government began to suspect that the British were interfering with Americans who were settling in the northern territories, especially in the Ohio River Valley and the Indiana Territory. They believed that Britain was using its outposts in Canada to help Native Americans who were fighting to defend their land from the settlers. In 1811, many Native Americans fought to remove settlers from their land in the Battle of Tippecanoe. The U.S. Army fought back. The American soldiers had reason to believe Native Americans received weapons from the British. The British denied it. They insisted that they were only treating with Native Americans, nothing more. But now, the war hawks, those who supported going to war with Britain, were furious. The British were attacking American ships at sea, and now they were causing trouble on American soil as well. The Warhawks in Congress put together a committee. Many of the Warhawks supporters in Congress were from the northern and western territories of the United States. They were the ones who were the most suspicious of the British. James Madison was the fourth president of the United States. Like the other presidents before him, he tried to find a way to avoid conflict with Britain. He knew that the United States was still a young nation with fewer than 8 million people. Today, that's about the same number of people that live in New York City. He knew they did not have a large army or navy, but the Warhawks believed that if the United States was going to fight Britain, now was the time. Britain was busy fighting the Napoleonic Wars. It would not have enough soldiers, sailors, and ships to fight the United States too. Some Americans thought that winning a war with Britain might also be an opportunity to gain more land. There was land to the north and to the south that they wanted. Finally, the Warhawks wanted to prove that the United States was a strong country. Still, President Madison did not want to rush into war. He called to ask the British government to stop interfering with U.S. ships and to stop trading and arming Native Americans. However, the British continued to ignore the president's requests. With the Warhawks demanding war, James Madison finally agreed. On June 18, 1812, the United States declared war on Great Britain. Right, we heard in the beginning of our read aloud that the United States wanted to have a good relationship with both Britain and France. Why do you think they wanted a good relationship with both countries? Do you think they maybe wanted to be able to trade with both countries? Or that as a new nation they didn't want to start another war? There are lots of reasons why they probably wanted to keep a good relationship with both countries. Before the story, we talked about the treaty that the United States had already signed with Great Britain. Did Great Britain keep that treaty? No. That is one of our reasons that led to the War of 1812. The British broke the treaty. Another reason, there was an attack on a US ship where a lot of Americans died, and that made a lot of Americans very angry at the British. The ship that was attacked was called the USS Chesapeake. And that was another reason, or another thing, that led to the war. Lastly, our last reason that we learned about in our read aloud that led up to the War of 1812, or that made many Americans angry with the British, was that they were arming Native Americans that were fighting against American settlers in the West. Why do you think that the Native Americans would want to help the British? What do you think? Alright, my friends, we have got one more thing that we're going to do today. I'm going to grab a picture real quick so I can show you what we're going to do. Alright, my friends, there are two parts to our assignment about today's read aloud. Our first part, that first page on that PDF, is another frame for a portrait to add to our portrait gallery. Today, we're going to be working on a portrait of this man. This is James Madison, our fourth president, and the one who eventually decided to go to war. In that frame, on that first page, I want you to draw a picture of Mr. Madison. I will upload this with the assignment as well. I want you to write his name on the line directly underneath the frame so that we know who your portrait is of. And then I want you to write 2 or 3 sentences about things that you learned about James Madison today. When you are done with your portrait of James Madison, then we're going to move on to the next page in your assignment. Go ahead and wait on James Madison. For now, I want you to pull up the PDF and scroll down to the second page. We'll put Mr. Madison right here for now. Alright, my friends, on that second page on that assignment, you should have a chart that looks like this. Our chart is split into 2 sections. One that says merchant and one that says war hawk. A merchant is someone who buys and sells goods for a living, and a war hawk was someone who wanted the United States to go to war back in 1812. We are going to work on a persuasive letter. To persuade someone means to get them to agree with your point of view. When we write persuasive letters, we are trying to convince someone to agree with us on some sort of opinion or stance that we have. Merchants and war hawks back in 1812 had different opinions about whether or not we should go to war with Great Britain. Remember, the merchants did not want to go to war. But the Warhawks did want to go to war. The Warhawks were the people that did want to go to war. We're going to fill in some information about our Warhawks and the merchants in colonial America. What I want you to do for this writing assignment is I want you to imagine that you are living in America in the year 1812. So you are seeing all of these things that happened. I want you to decide in your imaginary life where you're living in America in 1812, are you a merchant or are you a Warhawk? I want you to pick which of those things you think you would be. Do you think you would want to go to war? Or do you think you would want to keep peace with both countries? In our persuasive letters that we're going to write, they will be addressed to none other than Mr. James Madison, the President of the United States at the time. Your job in your persuasive letter is to convince Mr. Madison that we should not go to war or that we should go to war. You're going to try to talk him in to agreeing with you or persuading him to agree with you. When we write persuasive letters, it's usually best to use strong facts. So if we just say, Mr. President, I think that we should go to war with Great Britain because I don't like Great Britain and that's just what I think. Do you think that's a very strong argument? Do you think that would make someone agree with you? No, because that's just your emotions or your feelings about it. But if you have facts about why we should go and good reasons, it's more convincing. You will be more easily able to convince someone to agree with you. We're going to work on this chart. We're going to add some facts about the Warhawks and the merchants and create a list of reasons of why the merchants did not want to go to war and why the Warhawks did want to go to war. All right, my friends, let's go. The merchants, if you're a merchant and you buy and sell things for a living, you depend on trade. If we went to war with Great Britain or Great France, that would limit our trade with whichever country we were fighting against. They did not want to limit trade. I'm going to write war. Limit trade. They were afraid that if we fought with France, we wouldn't be able to trade with Britain. And if we fought with Britain, on Britain's side, we would not be able to trade with France. And they depended on that trade for their livelihood and survival. So they did not want to get involved in a war. One of these groups of people wanted to prove that America was a strong country. To prove that they were a strong country, they wanted to go to war. That was the Warhawks. They wanted to prove that America was strong. The Warhawks also thought that we would gain more land if we fought with the British, that we would gain some land from Canada. Remember, the British controlled and owned a lot of the land that is in modern-day Canada. The Warhawks believed that if we fought with the British, we might be able to win some of that land or conquer some of that land from the British. The Warhawks also thought that it would be a good idea to go to war with Great Britain now because they were busy fighting with the French and their army would be divided. The attention would be divided between the United States and France. They thought that would make Great Britain easier to defeat. I'm going to say they thought that Great Britain was weakened by fight with France. They thought that Great Britain was already weakened by their fight with France, so that it would be a good time for them to move in and fight with them. All right, my friends, see if there are 2 more things that you could add to this list. What's another reason that a merchant won't want to go to war? And what might be another reason that a war hawk did want to go to war? See if you can add 1 or 2 more things to that list, and then go ahead and turn it in when you are finished with your portrait of James Madison as well. We will work on turning these ideas on reasons we shouldn't go to war or reasons we should. We'll work on turning those into a draft of a letter to Mr. Madison in our next couple of lessons. All right, I will see you later, my friends.